the Federal Reserve took a break and skipped interest rate hike. What's your take on Fed's path, Jay? What would be their next move?
So I would say that their next move is they're probably going to raise rates in July. I mean, I think a pause at this point is probably appropriate because monetary policy works with a long lag in terms of its interest rates. And so I think the Fed, they're seeing signs that inflation is coming down slowly. And so a pause, I think, is appropriate. But by the time the next meeting rolls around in July, we don't think you're going to see enough signs of slowing in the economy or enough signs of inflation receding even further to prevent them from hiking one more time. So our sense is they go one more time at this point. But I think the most important thing is I think they're going to be on hold for a long time. That is, I don't expect them to be cutting rates anytime soon.
And when you look at the inflation rate, the Fed's target is 2%. And
right.
Do you think Fed will able to get inflation down to 2% in the near future?
So it depends on what your definition of the near future is, right? If your definition is the next few months, then I would say no. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think that we'll see that sometime maybe this time next year that it's moving back towards 2%. Part of that is because we do have a modest recession in our forecast. And so if the economy does go into a modest recession, that helps to bring in the inflation rate down. But, the Fed doesn't need to see it at 2% precisely before it starts to cut interest rates. It just has to be confident that inflation is moving back towards that area. And I don't think we're quite there at that point yet.
Mm-hmm. And Jay, in the past, you said quantitative tightening is the opposite of quantitative easing. Do you still think that we might be in a modest recession? If yes, why?
Well, so in terms of I don't think we are in a recession at this point. I mean, most of the indicators would suggest that the economy continues to grow at this point. But I do believe that, late this year, early next year, the economy will actually contract. And again, we're not looking for a big contraction. We think it's something relatively modest. And if that happens, then the Fed probably will stop its quantitative tightening sort of path. And so one way or another, whether we have a recession or whether the economy continues to expand, the Fed's quantitative tightening will only last so long. Their balance sheet will probably remain relatively large for quite some time.
Mm-hmm. And my last question, Jay, about the banking industry. Are we done with the banking turmoil? And do you still see some risk in the banking industry?
So, I wouldn't rule out another, bank failure. I wouldn't want to say that's not going to happen because, it clearly could with the thousands of banks that you have here in the United States. But I don't think it's also something systemic. I don't think this is 2008, where turmoil just swept through the entire banking system, and you saw a lot of very, very large banks fail at that time. The banking system today is much more liquid than it was 15, 20 years ago. It's much more better capitalized than it was 15 to 20 years ago. And so could you still have another bank failure or two or three, in the next few months or so? Sure. But I don't think this is a repeat of 2008 either.
Mm-hmm. Jay, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.